Adolescence Month on behalf of the workshop chairs, the organizing committee, and the youth referencing group. I would also like to welcome our participants who are joining us from our hubs in Malawi, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Mozambique. Thank you so much to all the other organizations that have made it possible for this workshop to be a possibility. The theme of this year's workshop is Building Health and Resilience. This is the first virtual HIV and adolescence workshop, which means that so many other people will be able to access it from all over the world. The youth referencing group is involved in the workshop planning and in the development of the content for the workshop. There are many young people who will be presenting. There are even 2 oral abstract presenters that are only 18 years old. There are over 200 young people under the age of 25 years old who have registered for the workshop. Each session is at least co-led by a young person, if not fully led. There will be 10 sessions across the month of November. You can check the workshop calendar for the dates. All sessions are held on air except for the skill building sessions, which will be held in Zoom. There will also be skill building sessions which will be run by mainly key partners, which will be held twice on Friday the 6th of November and the 20th of November. So you will have the opportunity to join 2 of the 5 sessions. Please sign up the skill building sessions. You must have received an email, and if you haven't, don't worry, you'll also receive a reminder. The poster presentations are available on air, and you will have time to view them at the end of each session. We have tried to make the sessions as interactive as possible. We encourage you to use the chat box function, share your experiences and questions, and get engaged. If you want to talk to one of the delegates, please go to the meeting hub. Most importantly, have fun.
Hello everyone, my name is Linda Gale Becker and I'm so delighted to welcome you to this 4th HIV and Adolescence workshop. As you know, this year we've gone virtual in 2020, but we still have a program completely packed and designed to bring you the latest and the greatest in terms of HIV and adolescence knowledge, information, and latest research, as well as fantastic engagement with young people as we usually do. We have made some inroads in HIV and adolescence, and that will be very much a feature of the program this year. We also will be showing latest abstracts, and I'm delighted that this year we've had 117 total abstracts accepted, 23 orals and 94 posters. Also, I'm as delighted that really the reviewers remarked about how quality has continued to improve year on year. And this means that we're doing more work in adolescence, more important work, and work that is worthy of dissemination. I think the excellence we're starting to see also is playing out in terms of better programming. So this year we will award a prize of free registration to next year, 2021's workshop, and that will be for the best oral abstract and the best poster. So look out for that during the next couple of weeks. So most of all, I think what will come home in this workshop is the need to integrate and provide differentiated care for adolescents. We know that sexual reproductive health issues as well as mental health issues are key to their well-being. And you will see some excellent work demonstrated at the workshop. Of course, we have all been impacted by COVID-19. And in addition, we bring to this workshop this year the intersection of HIV, COVID-19, and how we've been able, in many cases, with best practices, to continue to provide the best of adolescent programming despite the challenges. When I think about my wish for young people in terms of the HIV epidemic in the world at large, as we go forward, is that increasingly we will engage young people to understand what is the best kind of programming for them. And that engagement will be real, and it will be meaningful, and it will be authentic. So may we continue to do that. It's absolutely important that we keep adolescence on our agenda. We cannot talk about ending the AIDS epidemic or moving towards control of the HIV epidemic unless we address the question of adolescence around the world. And it's a wonderful opportunity, because if we do that, we will be investing in the triple dividend: adolescent health today, adult health in the future, and of course, the next generation's well-being as well. This workshop seeks to bring all the stakeholders into one room. And of course, that is critical, because we cannot solve these big challenges unless we bring an intersectoral, a multi-stakeholder approach. And so again, thank you for joining us at the HIV Adolescence Workshop. We hope you have a wonderful workshop, and we look forward to the dialogues we'll be having together.
It's such a privilege to be able to say a few words about HIV and adolescence during this session, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to do so. The timing of this series of virtual workshops could not have been at a better time. The world is a very confusing and distracted place at the moment, and it's important that we do not allow any gains, particularly in the fight against HIV, to take a backseat amongst all this distraction. As we deliberate on these important issues today, the world today also awaits and wonders about the outcome of one of the most consequential elections in recent memory. Leadership does matter, and in times of pandemic, leadership matters even more. We are also reminded that pandemics are political and that politics matter. While every country grapples with the global impact of COVID-19, we also grapple with the reality that pandemics are not only reoccurring, they also follow the structural fault lines within our societies. Said differently, whatever we hadn't fixed before COVID is exacerbated by COVID. This is particularly true in relation to the HIV response. In the world before COVID, the fight against HIV was enjoying remarkable gains, but within the celebration of these gains, there were also serious concerns about key populations as well as pediatric and adolescent HIV. In the world of COVID, where we know that pandemics follow fault lines, we are justified in being concerned about how the pandemic will impact the HIV response and how it will exacerbate the areas which were already of concern. Pediatric and adolescent HIV numbers were not giving us comfort before COVID. And if there was a time to refocus on this particular area, it is now. It also supports my worldview that if you want to solve a problem, look at it through the lens of children. If we resolve pediatric and adolescent HIV, we've gone a long way in forging a path towards a HIV-free generation as envisaged by the Start Free, Stay Free, AIDS Free framework. It's unacceptable that adolescence is the only age group in which AIDS-related deaths are increasing. It's unacceptable that in Eastern and Southern Africa, 1 in 4 women aged 20 to 24 years gives birth before the age of 18 years, and 30% of all new HIV infections occur amongst adolescent girls and young women aged 15 to 24 years. This is a crisis in and of itself and threatens to undo the very real gains in the global HIV response. When it comes to the complexity of adolescent needs, HIV is not a standalone topic. Adolescents deal with HIV. At the same time, they need to deal with issues of mental health, substance abuse, relationships, sex, parents, school, cultural and traditional norms within the context of the 21st century, financial insecurity, and all the other issues young people are focused on. Sexual transmission and injection drug use continues to be the main modes of transmission among adolescents who are not infected as infants. The same way we understand the need for a multi-sectoral approach in the HIV response is the same way we understand that young people are not defined by HIV. You have so many other concerns, and it is incumbent on all of us to reflect on the social and economic drivers of HIV. I remember as a young Black African girl, my parents' main concern that I would contract HIV or fall pregnant. Adolescent girls and young women should not be viewed through the lens of risk. They should be viewed through the lens of opportunity. Those opportunities are best unlocked when we listen to the views of adolescent girls and young women, their suggestions, and amplify their voices. And I'm pleased that this workshop seeks to define itself through the listening to and amplifying of the powerful voices of young people. I love the idea of using COVID to reimagine a new normal where a multi-sectoral approach that addresses social and economic inequalities is the norm. This would include reimagining how a stronger HIV response, which places adolescents and mothers at the center of what it means to be fair and inclusive. A stronger HIV response with a targeted approach for the most vulnerable adolescents, reimagining a stronger HIV response that focuses on adolescent-friendly access to testing, treatment, and counseling, and thinking about all the other multi-sectoral issues. While we reflect on the triple epidemics faced by women, which is HIV, COVID, and gender-based violence, we undoubtedly can reflect on how these three challenges intersect and how we can combine learnings to fight all three, as they do feed off each other. As we watch how COVID re-emerges in the much dreaded second wave, we have to reflect on how the nature of a second wave is based on what we didn't do. What we don't act on will always come back to haunt us in worse numbers. The future of the HIV response is based on what we don't do now. If we don't act now on the elimination of vertical transmission of HIV, it will haunt us. If we don't act now on adolescent sexual transmission and injection drug use, it will haunt us. If we don't act now on gender-based violence, where adolescent girls are exposed to sexual violence or relationships where they lack the agency to negotiate their sexual health and protection, it will haunt us. COVID doesn't reduce the urgency to act. It increases it. We can't afford to be distracted as every single day matters. Have a fantastic workshop and would have loved to be with you, but in this virtual world, it is what it is. So hopefully we'll see each other next year. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.
I wish to congratulate Virology Education for the work that you have put into this pivot to a virtual event in these challenging times. And I am honored to be representing UNAIDS leadership and to speak to the critical importance of maintaining a focus on and for adolescents in the global HIV response, especially in the regions of the world with the highest burden of adolescent HIV. Why is it important? In the Eastern and Southern Africa region, adolescent girls and young women account for 28% of all new HIV infections, yet they only form 10% of the adult population. Looked at another way, this is equivalent to 3,600 new HIV infections every week. And this rate in girls is more than double the rate of boys and young men of the similar age, who themselves are acquiring HIV at a rate of 1,400 every week. This is unacceptable. Further, Sub-Saharan Africa is home to almost 80% of the adolescents living with HIV globally. So in 2020, in a year when many more of our countries have achieved the 90-90-90 targets, fast-track targets towards the end of HIV as a public health threat in the year 2030, we are noting that young people are still underserved by HIV services. In far too many countries, there are still policies and legal barriers related, for example, to the age of consent that continue to limit access of young people to appropriate information, to HIV testing, and to sexual health services. So we note that only about a third of adolescent girls and young women between the ages of 15 and 24 years in the world's most affected regions and the countries that report to HIV have comprehensive knowledge about HIV. How can we expect them to protect themselves against an enemy that they do not know about? We also note that condom use among young people has decreased in many countries and falls way short of targets that are necessary for impact. Adolescents living with HIV are still more likely to be lost to follow-up, to adhere less well to their medicines, and to have poorer treatment outcomes than adults, even as the world records significant achievements in the area of access to effective HIV treatment and in the area of achieving sustained viral load suppression in the most affected communities. So we need to recognize young people's special needs for comprehensive care, and that this includes psychosocial support, as well as a range of sexual and reproductive health services. Our collective challenge, therefore, is to make the HIV response work for all young people. And this is why ensuring that young people are empowered to protect themselves from HIV, ensuring that they have access to prevention and to effective care and treatment remains a key area in the renewed global AIDS strategy that UNAIDS is currently working on. Decades of experience in the HIV response have shown us that when affected communities can fully participate in decision-making and fully participate in designing and monitoring interventions, that service delivery improves, HIV outcomes improve, and overall impact improves. And it's in this spirit that UNAIDS will continue to actively promote the engagement of young people in the HIV response. And we have already started to do this. We continue to invite young people to the table, to the decision-making table. We continue to listen to young people articulating their specific needs for the HIV response. And together we will work to ensure that AIDS becomes less of a threat to public health by the year 2030.
Asian and Pacific, it's a region that holds over 60% of the world youth population. In 2018, there were estimation of 110,000 cases of children who are living with HIV of the age of 14 and below. And in the same year as well, we see that there is 12,000 new HIV infection among those who are 14 years old and below, and 26% of the new HIV cases in Asian and Pacific are happening in young people between the age of 15 to 24. As scary as the data sound, I am optimistic of young people in Asian and Pacific because of how creative they are. To name a few, in Indonesia, the Lollipop program aims to increase the testing, treatment, and also adherence so that they can reduce the HIV rate among the young population. While in Malaysia, the PEA project aims to use artistic approach, to allow the young PLHIV to have an enabling environment to express themselves and also to highlight the importance of early testing and also early initiation of medication. And in Vietnam, the Lighthouse Enterprise shows that, when youth-led organizations are empowered and also sustainable, they can be a part of the national HIV response. And one of their massive achievements is the K equal to K, which highlight the importance of U equal to U. And there are more to be named. While I am definitely full of hope of young people in Asian and Pacific because I know we can be and we are the change maker in HIV response, and we can, with the advancement of the technology, we can think of something and a lot of stuff to strengthen the HIV response in our country.
And my name is Abigail Chumungwana, better known by my artist name, Abby Chams, and I'm from Tanzania. I'm 17 years old and I'm a musician, a singer, songwriter, as well as a pianist, a guitarist, and a violinist. And I'm also the founder of Teen Talks with Abby Chams, a program for the youth that addresses different issues we face and we discuss ways we can overcome those different issues. And I'm also the the founder of Abby Chams School of Music, which is an educational, musical education program, basically, here in Tanzania. And it is an honor to be with you all today. You raise me up to more than I can be. Social media is an opportunity for change, for inspiration, a center for creativity, to spread positivity instead of negativity, love instead of hate, and to build instead of tear down. My wish for the future of young people is to seize this opportunity that social media is.
We are delighted to note that over the last 1 year, in terms of the adolescent programming, we have seen a number of changes, especially in light of policy. We've seen changes relating to the age of consent for testing in a number of countries. We have equally seen that a number of countries have introduced national adolescent sexual and reproductive health policies that are enabling, as well as a number of differentiated programs targeting the adolescents. With this, we've also noted at the global level, the development of a service delivery framework for pediatrics and adolescents that are contributing to a number of interventions that we are seeing in our countries, including best practices around the decentralized treatment. We've seen task shifting for treatment for adolescents. We've seen more use of mobile phone case management. Additionally, we are seeing the community-based treatments coming in very handy for our adolescents. We've seen programs using adolescent transition, as well as integrating care for mental health and substance abuse disorders for adolescents. And more importantly, especially for this time, we've also noted a lot of presence of online social network support for young people. During this conference or our workshop, we are also appreciating the multidisciplinary approach that has brought together a rich representation of adolescents and young persons, both seasoned as well as young researchers, program managers, and implementers. We've seen a lot of contribution by the academia, but more importantly also, this time round, we are seeing a lot of service providers bringing in the wealth of their experiences from the field, and all these also contributing to the policy at national, regional, and global levels. This multidisciplinary approach allows us to translate the lessons we are learning, experiences that we are sharing, that we believe will trickle down and inform adolescents and youth programming, as well as policy formulation. Again, it is also important for us just to reiterate that each of the stakeholders that are participating in this workshop are bringing in their unique diversities in improving the outcomes for the adolescents and bringing new perspectives that help us move the agenda of adolescents forward. Lastly, it is also our acknowledgement that we are learning as we are doing, and therefore that is important in terms of engaging at the very grassroots, the healthcare providers and implementers, but also including our governments and policymakers in this workshop. Thank you very much.
Dear distinguished delegates, in collaboration with UNICEF, we will share a summary at the end of each week with the highlights including links to presentations on the Virology Education website. Please do share the wealth of resources of the latest evidence on adolescents HIV with your networks. As promised last year, and of course due to COVID-19, the feedback surveys are now online. You will be given this at the end of each session. Kindly also do remember to engage on social media. In the closing, we will share the most like posted and the most creative photo. Don't forget to use the hashtag HIV Adolescence and hashtag Young in Action. Also, don't forget to tag Virology Education. Take a selfie now and post it on social media. Feel free to ask any questions you want, and also to start us off with the interaction, type in the chat box what you hope to gain from the workshop during this workshop period. Special thanks to the workshop sponsors, Viv, Gillette, and Mylan for their generous support. We also wish to thank all our endorsers for actively promoting the workshop. We honestly wouldn't have done this without you. We really thank you. Please do have a wonderful HIV and Adolescent Workshop month. Thank you and welcome. Do enjoy.
Hi, colleagues. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for your interest in this session, which is really going to be exciting because we're going to talk about the achievement of the promise of adolescent sexual and reproductive health. We have very interesting presentations before us today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Mike Mbizo. I work with the Population Council in Zambia as Country Director, Senior Associate. But in terms of background, the one I like most is that of being a sexual and reproductive health advocate or activist. Although in terms of profession, I'm a professor in reproductive health sciences, and previously I worked for the World Health Organization in Geneva as Director for Reproductive Health and Research. But I've worked very much in the area of advocacy, in the area of adolescence, and I have a passion for improving sexual and reproductive health. And I'm joined by my colleague here who is going to introduce herself. Surprise, surprise. Welcome, Damaris.
What's up, everyone? My name is Damaris Nyamoya from Kenya. I work at the Kenyatta National Hospital as a peer counselor, and I'm happy to be here today where we're going to be talking about our topic for the day, which is sexual and reproductive health. Kindly don't forget to put down your questions at the chat box where we're going to go through them at the end of each and every session. I'm hoping that we're going to have an interactive session today, and we are all going to come out of this with something good that we have learned and that we are going to take it up to our different facilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damaris. That's very exciting. So we're going to go straight into our first keynote presentation. We have a keynote speaker, very well known and very dynamic and passionate about this area. Her name is Tumi Konyamani, who works with Frontline AIDS in South Africa. Tumi is a well-accomplished development practitioner with many years of her life devoted to social and gender justice work. The range of issues she has worked on includes gender equality, women's empowerment, gender-based violence, HIV and AIDS, sexual and reproductive health and rights, youth development and leadership, engagement of men and boys. She brings a wealth of experience in integrated program management, governance, and accountability, movement building, advocacy, and building organizational capacity to undertake social justice work. Welcome to me. Thank you.
It's such an honor to be chosen to speak on this very momentous occasion. I would like to start my presentation with a very short story about me, my own journey as an adolescent, and why this session is so important. I was 13 years old when I was recruited into a peer approach to counseling by teenagers program, which was run by the Botswana YWCA. This was a drive to get young girls and boys to be engaged in life skills development, to talk about all things SRHR, and to deal with what was then a raging HIV/AIDS epidemic. By all means, I represent a generation that many worried would not make it through. We were the generation that could have easily been wiped out by this epidemic. And consequently, any program that promised to turn the tide on HIV was invested in and got all of us young people involved. Through PACT, I would later learn to talk about sexual and reproductive health. I learned about human rights. I learned what gender justice was all about. I learned about girls' empowerment, and I also learned about feminism. I was always aware that my reality as a girl was significantly different from those of my peers, the boys. And so I was always astounded by how conversations that would always seemingly put us girls in boxes. We were meant to behave in a certain way. We were meant to do things and be a certain type of a girl. And I remember how I used to question everything. I would question, why should girls behave in a certain way? Why should girls be quiet? And why should girls be expected to take on gender roles that seemingly were very unfair? At 15, I finally stepped into the very magical world of being a young person who had mentors, was supported, and my leadership potential developed. I was also then christened into the feminist ideology. I was in love. I was bewildered by this concept that seemingly encompassed everything I believed in, and really, for me, began the root or the foundation of young people being engaged in the future. It was a concept that was so embracing of my knowledge, who I was, the existence I wanted to have, and where I wanted to go in life. I share my story because I have now become a practitioner. I now manage programs for young people. So I know firsthand what it means to be a young person, googly-eyed, really interested in a program and wondering what it has for you. I know firsthand also how programs tend to have young people on the periphery of their own development. And so a lot of investment that goes into really looking at young people as an investment are programs that appeal to me and to the heart and the passion of the work that I do. Fast forward to 2020, and here we are having a conversation about what works for us in 2020 to achieve the promise of adolescents' sexual and reproductive health and rights. And so I'd like to focus on the work that I do and make linkages to how young people are receiving this work and what can we do collectively together. It would be remiss of me not to acknowledge the context of COVID-19 and the way this is shaping our world, including us now having to have pre-recorded sessions and really missing the human touch. This year has not only forced us to stop, we now need to learn to listen, and we need to confront issues in ways that we haven't done before. We finally understand the importance of community and connection. Evidence shows that the additional negative impact of the pandemic on children and adolescents has both physical and mental health outcomes. A review by Shaw and others also affirms the statement that shows that mental disorders are already the leading cause of disability worldwide in young people. What more now in the context of COVID? They go on to say that about 15% of children and adolescents in the world have mental health disorders. And nearly 50% of those mental health disorders start to affect young people by the age of 14. So the one thing that COVID is really teaching us is that it is important to really stop in our tracks and think of ways that we can be more innovative and more responsive. From the field, we also know that COVID-19 has had severe impacts on young people's access to essential services. This includes what we have seen across the world, limited supplies or stockouts of antiretroviral therapy, as well as reduced access to other SRHR commodities. We're seeing an increase in unplanned pregnancies. We're seeing even more increases or perhaps more of a spotlight on gender-based violence, as well as young people's exposure to intimate partner violence and domestic violence. Regrettably, we've also seen how corruption has reared its ugly head. This has had such a drastic impact on the access to essential treatment and commodities for young people. And therefore, it becomes very critical for us to continuously check ourselves in terms of why this year is so significant, both in terms of this momentous event we're in, but also in terms of what this year really means for us moving forward. So what does it mean for us to achieve the promise of adolescent and sexual reproductive health? And why is it important that we begin this session in this way? This is what we know for sure. And this is evidence from the ground and evidence from the programs and the young people who are beneficiaries of our programs. What we know is that to achieve these promises, we need to continue investing in models that are proven to be effective. At Ready or through Frontline AIDS, one of the things we do and always pay attention to is the evolving needs and capacities of young people. And so we premise a lot of our programming on socio-ecological models or theories that really help us to link individuals to their families, the communities they live in, other stakeholders in the environment within which they are, as well as the legal and political environment to support advocacy. Our programs also demonstrate a social return on investment, meaning that when you invest in evidence-led and evidence-informed programs, you are able to actually measure the impact of these programs. One of the things that I actually wanted to share with you, we've just had a study, a social return on investment study, which has shown that one of our flagship programs, Ready Plus, has actually proven to have quite a huge or significant social return on investment. For every dollar invested, we're getting back nearly $4 of worth and value in terms of how the program is designed. What we also know is that we need to invest in capacity development of young people so that we do not continue to be the generation that sees young people as tokens for our development, but rather as agents and meaningfully involved in doing so. Some of the work that we also know in terms of what works and what we need to do is that we need to work with a cross-section of stakeholders. This includes service providers, healthcare workers, traditional leaders, and everyone else to ensure that young people continue to gain access to reproductive health and other services and treatment. As I said before, we need to engage communities, we need to engage families, and we need to do so to make sure that they also have a mind shift in the gains that we need to achieve for young people. Age alone, especially in Africa, is not a determinant of progress or development. A 15 or a 16-year-old in the global north is very far much more advanced than a 16-year-old in the global south who has even more of a burden when it comes to responsibilities. And so what we also know as programmers is that age alone should not be a determinant of how we program, the expanse of our programs, and what we need to do in response. We need to empower young people to have a voice and to inform service delivery. For us, this is a key action around accountability. Young people are not only users of services, young people are also informers and leaders when it comes to service delivery. It then becomes very important to ensure that they're able to give feedback on what we're doing right and areas where we need to improve. And finally, something that we also know is that we need to invest in communications and digital solutions. We cannot expect young people to respond to what was common 10, 15 years ago. Therefore, we need to make sure that our work should be interesting, it should be engaging, it should be current, and it should use all the media streams that have young people excited and invigorated to learn more. And that is why through the programs we're seeing across the globe that are very impactful, there's a huge focus on social media. It's about Twitter, it's Instagram, it's Facebook, it's webinars, and we're all forced to move with the times. I must also say COVID-19 has really shown us that we need to use technology in different ways. What do we still need to do? And this is basically learning from what have we not gotten right and what do we need to improve on. One of the things we still need to focus highly on is that we need to maintain integrated services and program responses. What this essentially means is that in order to achieve the promises for young people, we need to look at them in a holistic manner. We need to really see them for who they are and the different ways in which they occupy their own spaces and how they define themselves. We need to maintain a treatment adherence focus. Multiple studies have shown that where adherence is supported, be through innovative solutions like income generation projects, buddy systems, peer approach methods, that you tend to get higher adherence. And therefore, this continues to be an investment focus. We also know that the impact of mental health is one that has enduring consequences. And so there is a need to continue investing in the mental health and psychosocial support for young people globally. We need to include education, vocational skills, and employment in our programs. And this speaks to a very multisectoral approach or response into how we program. And I would like to pause here for a moment, because often when we think of sexual reproductive health and rights or HIV, we tend to think of them alone. And we're seeing increasingly that evidence shows that a much more comprehensive or integrated response usually has better impact. And I'll show this as we go on to the next slides. The other thing we need to focus and strengthen is to continue investing in youth leadership, in their agency, and in ensuring that voices of young people translate to impact. We need to open up spaces for policy advocacy, both at a national, regional, and within international development frameworks. Ultimately, we need to rattle, shake, and disrupt the status quo. One of my favorite quotes, and this really comes from, I suppose, what I'm trying to really drive across as a message. It's one that says the personal is political. It underscores the strong linkages between our personal experiences and how we interact with our society and the political environment. Thus, it is also my request to all of you to ensure that programming should not be an 8-to-5 job as it is for many of us, and instead it should be a definition of how we should support young people to occupy space, to have a voice, and to do things differently and change the world. How do we do it? And just to give you a snapshot into the way in which Ready does this work, and in ways that what I have already discussed as evidence-led links to all of this. Integrated programming. So we approach all our programming with young people from a perspective that there is a focus in terms of what you need to target, but you also need to provide complementary services. And so through integrated programming within the Ready portfolio at Frontline AIDS, we recognize that young people living with HIV require a specific response, but one that does not exclude other needs such as SRHR support, gender transformation work, and also linking them to additional services like income generation activities and economic livelihoods. We also recognize the importance to develop a new generation of leaders who will speak to these issues, and we do this through a program of ours that's called Ready to Lead. We've also had programs that had invested heavily in terms of mapping and the use of information systems and technology around helping young people to control information and to have access. Very exciting projects that we have done. Something else that we do is around meaningful youth engagement, which I've touched on quite a bit. and we invest a lot on learning and development. So what are young people saying about the strides made thus far? I can talk to you about Ayanda, one of our brilliant cats from Eswatini, who uses her life experience to mentor and provide psychosocial support to other young people. She does this because she understands firsthand the impact of stigma and discrimination for young people living with HIV. I have another story from Tanzania of how some of our young cats were involved in policy and legislation change as they tried to work towards changing the age of consent and really providing evidence in terms of why policymakers and other decision makers should be included in these processes. I can also share a story about Audrey from Zimbabwe, who talks about the gendered aspects of SRHR and HIV. She is a reminder, or rather, she reminds us every day that we cannot think of young people as this monolithic creature, but that young people represent an intersectionality that needs to go into how we program. If you take nothing else from my story and the work that so many of us do, take this with you. Please understand that for some of us, the impact that we potentially have in the world is one that we need to forever look into. We need to invest in solutions that are innovative and that really put young people at the forefront. We need to move away from doing work as usual, and we need to invest in young people-centered approaches. This means creating spaces for programs to respond to the evolving needs and capacities of young people. We need to reduce the red tape and the impossible requirements for enabling programmers to respond to young people's needs. We need to create spaces and trust that young people can lead, can innovate, and engage in much better ways than we possibly can imagine. This is what actually colors the lives of young people. And COVID-19, if anything, has proven that some of the stringent processes we tend to get bogged down with are just a process that can be dealt away with. Most of all, we need to invest in scaling up work that has been proven effective, such as the Ready projects that I've shared, and we need to speak up in every space that we occupy, that young people occupy, in order to get more funding, more buy-in, more political will in supporting the future of our young people.
Big hand to Tumi. Excellent. Thank you very much. Wow. That really is a story indeed. And it really resonates with the message we heard from the First Lady and from the opening in terms of if we don't act now, certainly it'll come back to haunt us. We cannot allow to reverse the gains we have made. Neither can we allow gender dynamics to subordinate the girl child. So my colleague is there, Damaris, to see if we can share and look at some of the questions. We'll start with the questions which have appeared during the presentation. For instance, the question I noted earlier is that of age, in that most of our politicians really tend to be in their early 70s, late 60s. And that's some of the issues that are challenges to young people. They may not necessarily resonate with their own positions. How do we challenge? I think you echoed, you said it very well at the end. We have to rattle, we have to shake. How do we do this when we have that gap with the politicians? Maybe if you take about 2 or 3, then we can have your response. Damaris, do we have another one we may want to bring currently just now?
Yeah, we also have some few questions from most of the delegates who are attending the session today. Crispin Machisa is asking, so an adolescent is somebody who's the age below 16. How best can we offer services if he or she can get an STI? Is it really necessary for them to contact the caregiver, or how do they go about this situation?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. The issue of access. And by the way, adolescence is 10 to 19 by WHO definition. And indeed, they need to have access to receptive services, to responsive services. And the question is, at times they are too expensive. At times there is stigmatization. how do we challenge some of those stigmatization that can act as a barrier to access by adolescents? To me, I think you will respond to that. Any question again, or if there's anyone who can raise their hand?
We also have another question from Moses Wanali, who's asking, how can we help adolescents who want education and vocational skills in the community?
Right, that's a very practical question. So we have 3 questions for now. And Tumi, over to you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would just like to say hello again to everyone who's tuned in. This is such a pleasure to be joining all of you today. Thank you for listening in. I mean, one of the biggest challenges for me personally was recording and really getting to talk to you via my computer, even though I cannot see everyone's faces. And without wasting too much time, the age-old question of this was a predicament when I was 16. It remains a predicament. But what we know for sure is by getting young people more educated into political life and why it's important to engage in politics and understand, you know, why it's important to vote in specific ways, is because we realize that unless young people are part of are brought to the table and supported in the political dispensations or education, we will forever have the older people occupying those seats. So this is what's then important, that we encourage young people in leadership positions, and that is why building capacity of young people as leaders is very critical. We're not saying every young person will become a politician, but we are hoping that those that do get to that platform with a very fair understanding of what it means to take forward the youth agenda. Crispin asks about access. And one of the things that programs need to do is to really demystify health for young people. Often we tend to focus on the STI rather than a holistic health outcome for young people. And one of the programs that I mentioned, Ready, for example, Ready Plus, we tend to make sure that programs are fun, are interactive, and recognize young people as agents of change. So instead of a young person feeling like just another statistic, we actually focus on making sure that young people are feeling empowered to access health services and that they are being linked to health providers who have been trained with youth-friendly services. So it's very important that we engage young people, for example, in comprehensive sexuality education so that they understand their body, they understand when something is going wrong, and they understand the rights they have in order to access health services. Moses, you asked a very important question, and this is something I also spoke to earlier on. A long time ago, when a young person was involved in an SRHR program or an HIV program, that's all you had. Now we talk about differentiated services and care, we talk about integrated responses. What we now know for sure is that by providing a complementary scope of services for young people, you have better outcomes. And in the programs that I work with, for example, we have seen the impact of linking young people to vocational skills training or to income generation activities. So I don't have a straight answer, but what I can say from a programmer's perspective is this. Evidence shows that integrated programs are actually effective. And so one of the things we need to do is to really speak to the donors, to speak to the clinical community and everyone else around evidence to really show that any program for young people needs to really respond to young people's diverse needs in totality.
Thank you very much, Tumi. We have another question from Kambana, who's asking, due to the coronavirus, we have lots of adolescents default. Basically, I think she's trying to ask about how we are going to manage the adherence for most of the adolescents who have defaulted their clinics due to the current pandemic that is affecting the whole world.
Should I take that? Or do you want to ask the next? Should I take both questions? I see we have two.
I think you can take that first as the rest come in.
Okay. Thank you for that question. And indeed, what we saw at the beginning of the COVID-19, what do you call it? When the disease broke out, the very first thing that we saw within young people's programs or within youth programming was the high rates of defaulting. And I mean, I don't know if there's a simple way of answering this, but I want to maybe focus on the innovation that other young people have actually implemented. For example, one of our partner organizations in Uganda, when they saw that young people would have challenges accessing their treatment, we saw other peer supporters, our cats, you know, getting on bicycles and delivering treatment to young people in their homes. We saw clinics opening up and providing ART in bulk versus just your once a month dose that is as per norm. We saw other organizations, for example, organizations like Frontline AIDS opening up and providing rapid response funds to enable organizations, especially youth-led organizations, to be able to provide care and support for young people. What remains important is this, that the health sector in itself now knows that at any given time, we could be dealing with a pandemic such as COVID-19. What COVID-19 showed us is that we were all underprepared. But we now hope that with the lessons learned from the experience we've had beginning of this year, that the clinical space will be seen more in terms of being able to provide and rise to the needs of young people, that us as programmers and peer educators who work in these programs, that we will be able to innovate and be able to provide support to young people in the home space and in the communities where they are.
Great, thank you very much. There are quite a few more questions. Damaris, do you have our next batch of 3 questions?
Moses is asking, how best are we able to help adolescents with mental health issues?
I think I'm going to start sounding like a broken record. I keep talking about integrated services. And this is very important. Like I said, in any program, and I really hope that we have you know, people from the funding world who will be part of this conference. We're seeing that there's really a need to invest highly in programs for young people that not only speak to the clinical side of their needs, but through a very holistic process. The programs that I work in, for example, all have a focus on mental health and psychosocial support. We do this by, one, making sure that young people have access or are referred for psychosocial support. And this means being able to map who are the providers of PSS in the countries where we work in. We integrate PSS or psychosocial support and care through the materials we develop. So if you were to go, for example, to the Ready website, you'll see that we have developed a lot of resources that speak to mental health needs of young people. So mental health is something we need to demystify. We need to make it fun. We need to make it topical. So it should not only be seen as an ailment, but as a lifestyle outcome. We all need mental health support at any given point, and it's important that programs see mental health as part of that holistic care or menu of services for young people.
Crispin is asking, should she give a 13-year-old a condom when they come to the facility? Is it advisable for a 13-year-old to get a condom when they visit for their normal appointment?
I'm curious to know where Crispin is from, because I would really like to link him to one of our cats in country. Crispin, I think, as you might know, before you decide whether to hand over a condom or not, It is always first preceded by some form of education. You sit down with a young person, you get to understand their needs, you get to understand why they feel they need a condom, you understand the history behind that, and you provide more than just the condom. And I say this because different countries have different laws, right? So it's difficult to say, yes, you do it and you move forward. What we believe in within the Ready movement and the work that we do across board is that young people are not just a point of handing out commodities. We always support commodities with information support, with counseling skills, and for follow-up, so that you really understand the needs of this young person.
Thank you very much, Mike. Mike, I don't know if you have one or two questions, because I'm seeing we're also almost running out of time.
Yeah, no, I think those are very good. I liked the age to link to look at services. I think you mentioned differentiated services, because the needs are going to be fairly diverse each time. And whereas one may consult with a problem that may not necessarily be the main issue here, or one may present, or there could be discussion, but where you have a holistic approach, where you look at their multiple needs, their context. I like the linkage, for instance, to income generation activities, to vocational activities and training, so that we are able to respond best to some of those needs. There was a question also of the age to include young people, which is certainly a correct one, to say adolescents and young people, so that we can embrace that whole generation from about 10 to 24. So that age is a good age to try and ensure that our services are responsive. There was a question of family planning distribution to adolescents, and whether indeed this can move to be provided from multiple sources. Maybe to me, you may want to relate a bit to that. I think you alluded to, but you know, integration that looks at SRH and HIV issues, services, and to see if we can be responsive to the dual needs or multiple needs of the young person that may require information and services. Thank you.
And once again, approaching this from a programming perspective and realizing that young people will have the benefit of speaking to clinicians later on. What remains important, and maybe just to touch a little bit on a model that we use within Ready, this is working with CATS. CATS are a cadre of young people who have been trained and are the ones that actually lead in the response around providing integrated services and care to other young people, some living with HIV, and others were looking at it from a preventative side through a different peer education program. So what we're seeing is that by equipping young people to be able to reach out to other young people remains a best practice model. So I spoke about having been part of a peer support group in the 90s. And we're seeing that in 2020, peer modeling remains relevant. And it's important for me to underpin this, because when a young person has the skills, the knowledge, and is able to articulate themselves and reach out to other young people, they then are able to actually grasp the full needs that a young person has. Whereas when a young person goes to the clinic, the nurse often just focuses on the clinical side of the needs and not a very holistic process that will then ensue had it been with a young person or a peer educator. So in some of the work that we do, and this is not unique to what we're doing at Frontline, but what we're seeing in many other good practice, best practice programs, is that by seeing a young person and really trying to understand their needs. So you're looking at the sexual reproductive health needs that they have and that they present with. You look at their relational skills. How do they relate to themselves? How do they relate to their partners? Because by default, that also impacts on the ability to negotiate for safe sex, or to be able to adhere to treatment, or to be able to speak out if they're having challenges with their treatment regime. We also provide an additional layer of work, and this is now really building capacity of the caregivers or the parents to better understand the needs of their young people or of the young people in their home setting. Often what we see is that where a young person, for example, is on treatment but has not disclosed to their caregivers, it becomes difficult for them to take that treatment. So it's very important that our programs also recognize the role of caregivers and parents and any other family members in being supportive towards the needs of young people. And this is not just around treatment, even just around sexuality education, health and nutrition, mental health support, and even being able to role model good behavior for issues around gender and gender equality in the home field. Then the next layer for me that also is very pertinent is enabling young people to be the voice for what they need to advocate for. I cannot speak on behalf of young people. And so it remains important that our young people are skilled and are enabled and supported to advocate for their needs in ways that many of us cannot do so on their behalf.
To me, that really is excellent. I think there are so many messages here to take if we are going to realize that promise, the promise of adolescent sexual and reproductive health and rights. I think we will take our break, but prior to that, Damaris, you have the Energizer. And
right before we take our break for 5 minutes, we're going to have an Energizer. And I know most of us are seated right in front of their laptops or computers or somebody who's using a phone. So there is this popular dance challenge that is going around the whole world that is making each and everyone get psyched and want to do it, and each and everyone wants to be in the trend of what is happening. We all know about the Jerusalem Dance Challenge, and I would like for us to at least just step out of your seat for 5 minutes where we're going to do the Jerusalem Challenge. I know it's going to be quite difficult for other guys to be able to see the rest of the team or us to see you guys, but we're going to do it. I'm just going to imagine that each and everyone has joined in and is participating in the challenge. So kindly, let's just stand up for a bit, and I'm going to move my camera. I hope you won't mind that, since the pandemic has really turned a toll on us. So I hope you're all ready. I don't know if you're going to see me, but I want us to start with the left leg. So we're going to tap 4 times. We go 1, 2, 3, 4. Then switch to right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do it again. We go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So right about now, I want us to do like a shuffle. So after we have done 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. We go 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go back again. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I hope each and every one of you is doing that. So we're going to do it with the song and just feel the rhythm and go with it. So we go 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do it again. One more last time before we go for our break, and then we're going to be back in the next 5 minutes. 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you very much, guys. I hope you have enjoyed the session. Looking forward to our next interaction.
So we should be back in a few minutes, in 5 minutes for the next session, which have oral presentations.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jerusalem, ikhaya lami,
Thank you very much, colleagues. We continue with the session. Just to say, we really have been fascinated by the responses. We have had interest globally, people who have submitted abstracts. And just after listening to Tumi, I could say, I could have listened all afternoon. It was so exciting. And that really is the tone as well when it comes to the abstracts. We had to find ways of narrowing it down to 3 and trying to look at the various in terms of global representation, in terms of diversity of topics and so on. But just to say the quality of all abstracts presented or sent were really good. So for now, my colleague is going to introduce our first oral abstract presenter for the afternoon, which complements very well the messages we've heard from the opening, the message from the keynote speaker, and also within that context of ensuring that we can deliver on the promise for sexual and reproductive health and rights. Thank you. Damaris.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike, for that. Our first oral presenter for the day is Mercy Marimirofa from Zimbabwe National Family Planning Council, who is, she's going to be presenting on knowledge, attitudes, and practices of contraceptive use among students in selected universities in Zimbabwe, conducted in 2019. Mercy, feel free to take the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mercy Marimirofa. I'll be presenting on my abstract title, Knowledge, Attitudes, and Practices on Contraceptive Use Among Young People in Selected Universities in Zimbabwe. The study was conducted in 2019. There was a gap between high sexual activity and contraceptive use among students in tertiary institutions. Therefore, this gap is yet to be holistically determined across all institutions. There was also anecdotal evidence from researches by other civil society organizations in the country, which indicates that unwanted pregnancies and safe abortions and STIs have become major reproductive health concerns among students in tertiary institutions. Therefore, this study was conducted to assess the knowledge, attitude, and practices, as well as to understand the sexual behavior, knowledge, and use of contraceptives among young people in these selected universities in Zimbabwe. We also wanted to determine the health systems related challenges affecting access to and utilization of contraceptives among young people. The study was a cross-sectional using both quantitative and qualitative research approach. 4 universities were purposefully selected in the country, while key informant interviews, focus group discussions, and structured interviews were conducted. Desk reviews were conducted also on national documents to triangulate the results of this study with other national surveys conducted before. The median age of the respondents was found to be 21 years. 95% of the students were never married, while 33% of the students had spent less than a year at the institution, with 25% having spent more than 3 years at the institutions. Sexual experience was found to be increasing with age from 15.7% among the age group 18 to 19 years to 63% among the age group 20 to 24. The median age at first intercourse was found to be 20, with 8.8% of the respondents highlighting that they had first sexual intercourse at the age ranging between 12 to 17 years. Contraception use was also high among the age group 22 to 24 years, with those in the same age group ever used contraception. Only 7% in the age group 18 to 19% had used contraception before. There was also high use of emergent contraception in the age group 22 to 24, with 42% of the respondents highlighting that they had ever used emergent contraception. 35% of the respondents had used 2 to 3 times emergent contraception 6 months prior to the survey. 95% of the respondents highlighted that condom is a dual protection method for both pregnancy and STIs, including HIV and AIDS. Most female students also highlighted that they had a perception that men do discontinue condom usage sometimes during sexual intercourse. 3% of the respondents highlighted that there were other traditional methods which were being used to prevent STIs and pregnancy. 66% of the respondents highlighted that they were using contraception for spacing and delaying having children. About knowledge on contraception, there was high knowledge across all institutions, with 100% of the respondents from Midland State University know about contraceptives. However, students highlighted that lecturers do not bother to teach about contraceptives, although some do teach during the orientation to new students on health and life skills. Students know most about the pill, with 85% of the respondents knowing about the pill, 82% know about the condom. The least methods known by the respondents were the permanent methods, tubal ligation and vasectomy. 13% also know about other traditional methods used as method of contraception. 68% of the respondents highlighted that they started to know about contraceptives during their secondary education. There was also an attitude towards those who were using contraception, the young unmarried young women in tertiary institutions. 67% of the respondents highlighted that those young women are very responsible, while 30% highlighted that those who are using contraception who are not yet married are very promiscuous. Orals, injectables, and condoms were the only methods highlighted by students that were found in health facilities within the institutions. Hence, there were no method mix or a choice for students. The type of condom also found within the institutions was not preferred by the students. Students were preferring to use emergent contraception, although they highlighted that it was not really available within the college clinics. There was also fear of parents, friends, and discrimination. These were major concerns of young women and men not using contraception. Students also highlighted that some contraceptives were being sold at exorbitant prices. However, this was outside the health facilities within the institutions. For those who were being provided with the health institutions, 50% of the students highlighted that it was very acceptable as they were being offered for free. Side effects, lack of knowledge, as well as religion were highlighted as some of the barriers to contraceptive use by young women and men in tertiary institutions. In conclusion, our study unearthed that increased awareness does not translate to increased uptake of services if the students are not well informed on the benefits of the family planning services. There is also need to motivate young people for effective and appropriate use of contraceptives as to arrest the upward trends in unplanned pregnancy and STIs and HIV. There is need to understand the challenges young people encounter which hinder them from accessing contraceptives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mercy. Excellent presentation. Now we're going to go into our second presentation, which is by Samkelesiwe Nyamati from Hope, Cape Town, South Africa. Samkelesiwe is going to talk about risk of HIV infection in young peripartum women, that's aged 15 and 24, 15 to 24. And this is a study from Tygerberg Hospital in South Africa. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Samke Nyamate, and I'll be presenting on a study that we conducted as an organization, Hope Cape Town, which looked at the risk of HIV infection in young peripartum women between the ages of 15 and 24 years old at Tygerberg Hospital. Okay, so the presentation outline is I'll look at the rationale for the study, the aims, the objectives, the study methodology, the results, some interesting findings, as well as future benefit and how we've gone forward from the study. Okay, so the rationale for us conducting the study is Obviously, we are facing a huge problem in South Africa in which adolescent girls and young women in the age group of 15 to 24 years old contribute a quarter of all new HIV infections in South Africa. As an organization, we normally look and deal with pediatric patients who are normally under the age of 18. But we've since started noticing that there's a huge problem in the adolescent age group. So 69,000 of new HIV infections in young women were in young women between the ages of 15 and 24 in 2017 to 2018. The HIV incidence in this age group is 3 times higher than their male counterparts. There's been great success with PMTCT in our country, and this is because a lot of women enter the healthcare services through PMTCT. However, we do now know that pregnant women are at a high risk of HIV infection, and this is probably because of the decreased condom use while women are pregnant. So we aim to use a validated risk score to determine what proportion of young women who give birth at Tygerberg Hospital could potentially be at risk for HIV infection. We aim to use the outcomes of the score and the interviews conducted with women to advocate for tailored interventions and to prevent HIV infection in this population. So the initial tool was developed from studies in 2016, which reviewed the VOICE, FemPrep, and HPTN 035 randomized control studies to develop a risk assessment tool with measured characteristics that predicted HIV infection in women in the year after risk assessment. The risk score identified 91% of incident infections in 64% of the women in the VOICE trial. So this tool looked at baseline characteristics which placed women at risk of HIV infection or were protective against HIV infection, and basically looked at the ages of the women who were either married, employed, the number of preceding births, alcohol use in the past 3 months, whether or not the partner had provided material or financial support, primary sex partners, as well as knowing the sex partner's other partners, whether their sex partner was circumcised, whether they had previously been treated for STI, and in the modified version of this risk assessment tool, the last 2 characteristics were excluded based on the fact that a lot of women did not know whether they had been treated for STIs or HSV2. So we did an observational cross-sectional study at Tygerberg Hospital in Cape Town, and the women who were included in the study were HIV uninfected women who are currently attending the antenatal clinic or admitted to the wards, the antenatal labor or postnatal ward. The team who did the recruitment process and who also helped with some of the interviews were Miriam Relusa and Alfreda Leroux. These were women who work in the wards and who are very familiar with the women who come in and out of the antenatal clinic and the postnatal wards. And they're often the team that provides a lot of the counseling and support to adolescent girls and young women. So what we found after interviewing 370 women between the ages of 15 and 24, that majority of the women were between the ages of 15 and 24, the mean age was 21, and the majority of the women had come from the city of Cape Town. Okay, so as previously mentioned, we did a primary risk score as well as a modified risk score, both of which showed significant high risk of HIV infection within the next year. In the first score, we saw that women had a 60% risk of developing HIV infection in the next year. And in the modified score, we saw that 57% of women had a high risk of becoming HIV infected in the next year. Through our interview process, what we also did was look at risk factors as well as protective factors against HIV based on similar studies which had been done in the past. What we found was that completion of secondary school, employment, marriage, as well as partner circumcision tend to be protective against HIV infection, even in this cohort. And the risk factors that we saw and that we found were things that we needed to look out for were women who had early sexual debut, women who had no idea of their HIV status prior to admission, and women who were involved in significant transactional and age-disparate relationships. Since then, what we had done was collaborate with other NGOs working with adolescents to develop peer support programs and to assist women to prevent the further HIV infection or infection with other diseases. We have also seen the benefit of adolescent clubs and have advocated for women in this age group to develop their own adolescent clubs for future and for the future prevention of HIV infection in this cohort. I'd like to acknowledge the following people who contributed significantly to the study, as previously mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samke. Our third and final presentation for today is by Carmen Logie from the University of Toronto, Canada, who will be presenting on contextual considerations to guide HIV prevention cascade optimization from urban refugee and displaced adolescents and youths in Kampala, Uganda.
I'm very excited to be here today to talk about our work with urban refugee youth. I want to acknowledge my co-authors, Dr. Moses Okumu, Robert Hakiza, Simon Mwima, Vibhuti Kacholia, and Dr. Peter Chimbade. There are 79.5 million forcibly displaced persons around the world, and 40% are under 18 years old. And we know people in humanitarian contexts experience increased exposure to sexual and gender-based violence, alongside unmet sexual and reproductive health needs. And we also know there are many barriers to accessing HIV prevention and testing in humanitarian contexts, but these are understudied among adolescents. They're also understudied among refugee youth who live in urban areas. Most of the research has been conducted in settlements. So we focused in Uganda. Uganda hosts 1.4 million refugees, and we focused on the 80,000 refugee and displaced people living in Kampala, the urban setting. A previous study we conducted, we found only 56% of refugee and displaced youth in Kampala had ever been tested for HIV, and we also found suboptimal STI testing. We found social ecological factors such as stigma and food insecurity were associated with both HIV and testing practices. So we actually applied Campbell and Cornish's conceptualization of health enabling social contexts. And we specifically looked at material contexts, which includes access to resources such as clinics, economic security, transportation, and symbolic components where people's dignity and value are respected and they're able to view themselves and others in a way that help them engage in healthcare. And so we conducted a qualitative study that involved 5 focus groups with refugee and displaced youth living in 5 of Kampala's informal settlements in Zambia, Katwe, Rubaga, Kansanga, and Kablagala. 2 focus groups were with young women, one aged 16 to 19, one aged 20 to 24, and 2 with young men, same age breakdown. 1 focus group was 16 to 19, 1 with 20 to 24, and 1 with refugee youth sex workers. So we had a total of 44 participants. Most were from the Democratic Republic of Congo, followed by Rwanda, Burundi, and Sudan. And most identified as refugees, and 2/3 had ever received an HIV test, and over 3/4 were unemployed. So these are basically our findings in a snapshot. For material context, participants discussed transportation barriers, a lack of private spaces due to overcrowding and their living conditions, literacy challenges, and also language barriers. So because there's refugees from so many different places in Kampala, there's actually needs for translation in many different languages. We also found symbolic contexts were associated with HIV testing practices, including religion, medical mistrust, and inequitable gender norms. So for the sake of time, I'm only going to highlight a few examples. For example, in the material context, many people said because of the high rates of unemployment among refugee and displaced youth, they didn't have funding to travel to HIV clinics. And so on the bottom quotation, one woman is describing, even if there's a free service, if people have to travel to get there, they're not able to make it to that HIV testing site. We also were exploring HIV self-testing, and participants described that people are living in really, really crowded spaces. So it's hard to find even a private space to do the test. And there's also challenges accessing garbages that are private. So if you have a self-test kit that's used, where are you going to dispose of it where other people won't find the result? And literacy was an issue. And people said, even if you have illustrations, it might not be enough for people who've never accessed formal education. You might actually have to show people in person how to use, for example, an HIV self-test kit. For symbolic context, religion was an interesting finding because people talked about religion as a way that they stayed connected to their communities and countries of origin, so other refugees. And they also suggested that that's a good place to meet lots of youth if you want to engage youth, but you may have to do some work with religious leaders who might have prejudice. But we've also found this in other studies where you can engage religious leaders and have them be part of a solution for promoting sexual health. And others discussed there was mistrust of community-based outreach. So people who didn't know outreach workers coming in and offering testing. Some people, as in the first quotation, said, are they real people that are supposed to test? Are they trying to give us the virus? And others discussed widespread experiences across trajectories of coming as a refugee and being as a refugee, of sexual and gender-based violence, embedded within inequitable sexual relationship power dynamics. And those really constrained women's ability to have sexual agency. So altogether, social environmental factors shaped engagement in HIV prevention and testing with urban refugee and displaced youth. We need to consider transportation costs, so beyond offering free testing, crowded living conditions, and the need to access private spaces, literacy and language. We also can really leverage the role that religion continues to play in refugee youth's lives by engaging with religious leaders. So we really need to think for developing health enabling environments. We do need to provide technical information, resources, and skills alongside addressing the social circumstances, cultural norms, and values that constrain people's agency over addressing their sexual health, while leveraging the strengths, resilience, and resources in refugee and displaced people's communities, especially those among refugee and displaced youth themselves. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. That really is excellent summary, some excellent presentations. I think these are really rich presentations from all the speakers, and it does link on very well with the earlier presentations. There are a few questions that have been generated that have been coming through, and some which are continuing to come through. Damaris is going to be sharing some of those, but I just thought one key one which always comes, which has come up, is how to address social norms that tend to act as barriers. How do we engage communities? How best can we engage them to get them to relate to and identify with some of these challenges that are encountered? You know, I heard the First Lady talk of look at them as opportunities. How indeed we can turn those challenges into opportunities for reaching out to young people, for responding favorably to some of those needs. One of the questions was the challenge of attaining the 95 global targets when services for those that are below 16 are denied. How can we ensure that we can mobilize communities to be supportive in terms of some of that access and ensuring we can attain those global goals? So Damaris, you have additional questions, and then we can get our presenters to respond where they can. Thank you.
Yeah, I have, there's a question raised to Mercy Marimirofa. Monica is asking, how did you control for social desirability? And we also have a question to Samke. Crispin is asking, how sure is this? I heard that contraception do not work when one is on ART. Is it true? Is it false? And I also have another question to Samke. Someone is asking, do you think social image of women and society is a reason for such results? For the results that you presented in you showed in your presentation. Someone is asking, is it due to the image that women are being given in the society?
Sure. So I think I can tackle, let me start with the question around social norms, because I think it was mentioned quite a few times, I saw in the chat. And one of the things that we noticed was the importance of getting positive role modeling for some of our young people. You know, when we started the study, one of the difficulties was that these young women were already coming in, you know, on the back end, having already been pregnant, and the stigma that is attached to that being placed on them for a very long time, and then having to go back into society and finding that, you know, the role models that they have are not positive, you know, and then often some of them returning over and over and over again. So I think, you know, one of the things that we need to do to address these social norms is involve communities with adolescents and adolescent girls and young women, and ensure that we don't, you know, just have one representation where young people are seeing it to be an attractive thing to, you know, engage in age disparate relationships, for instance, and transactional sexual relationships, for instance. And then also just addressing the question around contraceptives and ART. I think Crispin asked that question. And, you know, obviously we know through evidence that that is not true. Contraceptives are highly efficacious. And I think, you know, Mercy spoke quite significantly around perceptions around contraceptives and the attitudes around contraceptives and how often they speak to, you know, what people see as, and we need to change that, particularly in a setting where we're trying to get a lot of our young girls, you know, further educated, upskilled, to be able to, you know, facilitate their futures.
Okay, I think we might have lost Mercy, but maybe I will throw it out to the panel. We have Samke, Carmen, and even Tumi has joined us, I know. This question on somebody who's asking, is it safe for an adolescent to start using contraception before getting married? I know it's quite a tricky question, but I trust you guys. Anyone from the panel, Tumi, Samke, or Carmen, may assist us in?
Sure. So I'll jump in. I think often, you know, the controversy goes around, you know, do we start young, do we place young people on contraceptives, and is that a promotion of sexual activity? And that's a very big contentious issues. And I think it differs in different countries as well. It differs with accordance to what religion people aspire to. It differs according to educational background. And it just differs, you know, according to what your political context is like. So often it's seen, you know, it's shunned upon to start placing people on contraceptives or start talking about sexual activity within the primary school, high school ages. However, you know, evidence is showing that younger young women are starting to have sex at a young stations, to need for them to be placed on contraceptives, like Dumi was speaking about earlier. It's about comprehensive services, and if we're recognizing that they're at risk for infectious diseases, then they're also at risk for pregnancies, which we need to be aware of.
That was great, Samke. I'll just add that we actually measured adolescent sexual and reproductive health stigma with a scale that was developed in Ghana with the refugee youth we're working with. We actually found that one of the scales is around stigma towards contraception and stigma towards adolescent pregnancy. And that was associated with lower uptake of HIV testing. So actually stigma we have around adolescents realizing their sexual and reproductive health by accessing contraception is also a barrier to accessing HIV. So on the flip side, it means if we can reduce the stigma around adolescents engaging with sexual and reproductive health services, we might be able to encourage them to also engage with HIV services. So what Samke had said about a comprehensive, integrated approach, I think really we know that offering sexual and reproductive health services is empowering, promotes sexual agency, and it doesn't inspire people to start having sex. We wish more people were accessing these services so that they could do it do whatever they need to do in a healthy way.
Yeah. And Carmen, while we're still with you, there's a question by Barbara for you. And she's asking, how best do you address the key risks identified, especially the social norms in such urban settings?
I think it's looking at both the social norms towards refugees, so reducing stigma also and mistreatment, as well as looking at intersectionality. So when refugees were also sex working, they experienced more barriers to healthcare because they said, well, is my refugee status going to be held against me if I'm also a sex worker who's criminalized? So I think we need to decriminalize sex work everywhere, promote sex worker rights, and then we can be supporting also very vulnerable folks. So also when the sex workers are also LGBT and refugees. So I think part of it is just looking at the stigma from an intersectional perspective. So how refugee stigma might be amplified by inequitable gender norms, and then by sex work stigma and HIV stigma. So I think it needs to take a really equity approach to reducing all kinds of stigma. And then, you know, we'll be able to promote an environment where people feel less judgment just about who they are in general.
Okay. Mike, I don't know if you have any other question from the chat box.
Question of use of contraception, whether there is problems or whether it's contraindicated because of age, if one is not married. Just to say, to add to the response and say, for methods of contraception for providers, there is information, services, and counseling that's available that is tailored to particular age groups. So one cannot really say because they are not married, they can be denied access to a method of contraception. We know that there is a variety of methods. The key issue here is to ensure choice. You know, some people say, I have weight gain with this method, I have acne, or I have this compromise. And so when that choice is given in the counseling, the provider can talk about which method is appropriate within that context, within that environment, within that age group, and certainly where that choice is wider, something more appropriate for that person. I think what's worse is to deny access to somebody because they are not married, because the next thing they come is they will present with complications of an early and unintended pregnancy. And certainly lives have been lost during pregnancy, where people have been denied access to a method when they were sexually active. So yes, let's be cognizant of the diversity of needs and the fact that somebody would have presented to a health facility seeking a method for contraception. That really is indicative of the fact that they are sexually active, but they would like to be protected against the potential risk associated with that. I just thought I would add to that. Is there another question there that may have come? Associations between adolescent reproductive stigma awareness. Oh, okay.
So someone had asked me for that article, so I just put it in.
Okay. That's reference. Thank you very much. In sexual and reproductive health matters. Thank you. So do we have any more questions? People can actually even ask their questions live. They can flag, and we should be able to hear them if they unmute, apart from those we have in the chat box. Or contributions. By the way, I just wanted to underscore one thing, and that yes, these are important questions indeed, and they respond to the issues that we encounter. But we also want to hear recommendations, actionable recommendations that contribute to that promise. What is it people are finding that works other than that which is presented in short snippets? What is it that's working? What is it that's promising? Share some of those promises. You could include them in the chat box so that we can collect and collect some of these good practices, because we do not have a magic bullet in terms of what works. It's going to be varied in various contexts and by various needs and the diversity of what one is seeking. Thank you.
Yes, so far, there are no more questions on the chat box, unless we could get Gerald is asking, how do you support adolescents to get condoms that they are comfortable using? That those who are not really comfortable. For example, in our clinic back in Kenya, you find that some adolescents, when they come for their normal appointments, they're not really comfortable carrying the condoms that we provide over here due to the word or rumors that go around about such kind of condoms. So Gerald wants to know, how do you help such adolescents?
Any of our panelists can address that, can respond to that. But all I can say is, you know, we have countries which have done very well. Thailand, for instance, they went toward a massive condomization program quite earlier on. They were one of the lead countries that showed that you can demystify the condom and you can make it available for people, and they were able to have, you know, access from various outlets, including the cyclists, those triple cyclists. So in terms of access, I think what challenge we have is that very often it's hidden. It's very difficult to even go to a supermarket and ask for a condom. Even the pharmacist, at times it's hidden, you are uncertain where to find it. But where the choice is there and available, I think they are available for all age groups, and one should be able to make a choice between the variety of condoms. So it's something which in our advocacy, you know, in our advocacy for services, in our advocacy for commodities, you know, in the youth voices, we need to include, we need to integrate and say availability of condoms is one way of ensuring we have dual protection. Thank you. And not just in terms of protection, by the way, but also for other things. You know, if you talk closely, some people will actually mention that it's enabling, it's empowering when you have the male partner assuming responsibility for contraception by electing to use a condom, for instance. Thank you.
I agree. I think we need to be comfortable talking about sex, talking about condom use, provide, as you mentioned, different types of condoms, different colors of condoms. I've worked at a youth clinic, a teen pregnancy clinic, and they had cool little cases, little envelopes or little cloth bags. So just engage young people in creating the designs for the condoms, the condom covers, condom packages. And you know, there's a lot of examples of condomized parties, you know, at the AIDS conference. So we can really just make condoms more fun, talk about it all the time.
Thank you. Picked up on anything else, Damaris, in terms of questions or further contributions, or are there hands up, any hand up for any verbal contribution or a question?
So we have a question from Judy Machuka. She's asking, what evidence-based stigma reduction strategies are there for young people that could be adapted sustainably in resource constrained settings?
That's a very good question to pose to our panelists, including our keynote speaker. Any responses to that? Maybe you may just want to repeat it again so that the panelists and the keynote speaker can get that question.
What evidence-based stigma reduction strategies are there for young people that could be adapted sustainably in resource constrained settings?
Right. So any lessons? Do we have any lessons? There are countries which have done very well in terms of stigma reduction. I can think of Scandinavian countries and so on, but we need more examples from the region. If there are any good examples of stigma reduction strategies for access and utilization of condoms and other methods.
just put a link because I'm part of an NIH working group on stigma and global health, and we have a special issue, it's open access, on stigma reduction and with systematic review. So there's a lot out there.
Great. Thanks very much,
Thank you very much, Carmen, for that. Mike, I'm seeing that we are running out of time. Unfortunately, we are not be able to go through all the questions that have been posted at the chat box.
Okay, so we know that there is a poster viewing session that's available, but also we need to be thanking our sponsors for giving us this opportunity. In the poster viewing, we certainly are able to see some of the abstracts, quite a number of abstracts which were accepted being shown. It would be good to visit that poster viewing. And I think let's thank very much our organizers for this opportunity to share, to hear, and also our presenters for preparing some excellent presentations, for really setting this tone for the rest of the presentations, I think, in terms of the diversity of contributions and the interest generated through some of the questions and contributions that have come up. So I think a big hand to all the colleagues and everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And kindly, thank you very much for each and everyone who has taken time to join in through the first session of the day. And we would like to see you again in our next session, which will be taking place on 5th. That is on Thursday. And it is very unfortunate that on that particular day, you won't be seeing this beautiful face, but I know there are so many beautiful and handsome faces that will be taking charge and running the program on that particular day, as we are going to be discussing on the knowledge is power, and we want to enable adolescents to know about their HIV status, because we need them to take charge and get to know and start managing their own health. So this is quite a good session, and I hope that you will tune in. And also, as we prepare for that day, don't forget to drop in your questions at the chat box, as we also wait for that particular day. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
By the way, what time, Damaris, on Thursday? What time, my friend?
On Thursday, same time, same place, but different faces.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, I think, are you continuing with the dance, the Jerusalem dance prior to departing?
Unfortunately, I was using a speaker, but it just died on me. So I don't know how I'm going to play the music.
Okay. All right. So maybe Thursday we'll see something else. No, thank you very much. And let's see what comes up on the poster presentations. Goodbye, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.